You check your bank account, not because you're worried, because you're thorough. Responsible people check their accounts. Responsible people stay on top of things. So you open the app, maybe 3 times today, maybe 4. Each time, the number is the same. Each time, the situation is the same. You already know what you're going to find. And yet, you check again. Because the checking doesn't come from fear, it comes from vigilance, from a quiet habit of monitoring that has slowly become so automatic, so woven into daily life, that you don't experience it as a behavior anymore. It's just who you are. Someone who pays attention. Someone who stays on top of things. No one would argue with that framing. But there's a version of this where the checking isn't about the money anymore, where the scanning, the calculating, the quiet sense that you should probably have a little more saved just in case, isn't responding to a real threat. Because the money is fine. The money has actually been fine for a while. So why doesn't it feel that way? The strange part is that saving more money can actually make the feeling worse.
Let's establish something clearly before we go any further. You are not bad with money. That framing doesn't apply to you. The person who's bad with money spends without looking, ignores accounts, carries debt without much concern. That is not you. You are conscientious, probably more conscientious than most people around you. You track things. You've read enough to know the difference between what you should be doing and what most people actually do, and you've generally tried to do the former. You've had uncomfortable conversations with yourself about spending, about priorities, about whether what you have is enough for what might come. By most reasonable measures, you are doing it right. And yet, the feeling doesn't arrive. The safety you assumed would follow the responsible behavior hasn't come. You kept your end of the agreement. You deferred things. You said no to purchases your income could have absorbed. You built the fund that every sensible piece of financial content told you to build. The result was supposed to be a kind of settled quiet, a confidence that things are okay. But it isn't quiet, and it doesn't feel okay. What's frustrating, and what almost no financial content acknowledges, is that you already know the money is there. You're not in denial. You understand your situation clearly. You can name the numbers. And still, understanding the numbers doesn't change the feeling underneath. That gap between knowing and feeling is where this actually lives.
Here's what's actually happening. Saving money is a behavior, and like every behavior, it has an emotional logic underneath it, a feeling it's trying to create or a feeling it's trying to avoid. When you save, the stated goal is financial security, but the emotional goal, the one your nervous system is actually pursuing, is safety, not wealth, not options, not freedom. Safety, the absence of threat. And this is where things quietly go wrong, because your nervous system is not a financial planner. It doesn't read balance sheets. It responds to signals. And somewhere, through experience, through observation, through years of watching how quickly circumstances can change, it learned that money is a threat signal, not just the absence of money, the whole subject, the whole domain. So here's the loop. You save, the number goes up, and for a moment, sometimes just a moment, the signal quiets. Something like relief appears. The nervous system registers a reduction in threat, and then it begins scanning again, because that's what it was built to do. The relief wasn't a conclusion, it was a pause. The system didn't register safety and switch off. It registered temporary stillness and immediately looked for the next thing that might require attention. This is why the number never quite lands, why you can double your savings and feel almost exactly the same within a few weeks, why enough keeps moving, Not forward by a fixed amount, but just slightly beyond wherever you currently are. You were trying to resolve a psychological need with a financial action. And that substitution looks like it should work. The logic is almost airtight. More money means more security. More security means feeling safer. But the feeling never receives the message that the logic sent. And that gap, that persistent, quiet gap, is the trap.
The mechanism running underneath this has a clinical name, though the name is less useful than seeing how the thing actually moves. Psychologists sometimes use the word hypervigilance, but that word tends to conjure something dramatic, extreme trauma responses, crisis states. What you're experiencing doesn't feel dramatic enough to qualify. It feels more like practicality, like being a serious adult who understands that things can go wrong and wants to be prepared. That's how it presents. That's exactly how it justifies itself. Underneath the practical framing, a loop is running, and the loop has three parts that feed each other in sequence. It begins with a thought, not a dramatic one, a quiet one, something like, "This probably isn't enough yet," or "I should have more before I feel comfortable," or "What happens if something unexpected comes and I'm not ready?" These thoughts feel like realism. They feel like what a serious, responsible person thinks. They don't feel like anxiety. They feel like good judgment. That thought produces a feeling, a low-grade alertness, a background tension that's easy to normalize because it's been present for long enough to feel like your default state. You might not call it anxiety at all. It just feels like attention, appropriate awareness. That feeling then drives a behavior, in this case, saving more, checking the balance, running the numbers again, adjusting the plan. These behaviors feel productive because they are a response to a perceived problem. But the critical thing to observe is that they don't resolve the loop. They complete one rotation of it. The behavior produces a brief, genuine reduction in the feeling. The thought quiets. You did something. For a day, maybe a few days, the background tension drops, and then the thought returns. Not because your situation changed, not because a real new threat appeared, because the loop resets, because it is a loop, not a line. You don't reach the end of it, you just circle back to where you started, often without noticing the circle. What makes this particularly durable for people who are analytical and informed is that the loop feeds on information. The more you know about inflation, healthcare costs, job market shifts, what an unexpected illness or market correction can do to even a careful plan, the more material the thought-generating side of the loop has to work with. Your intelligence isn't protecting you from the loop. In many cases, it's supplying content for it. A less analytically inclined person might feel the unease, take some action, and move on without much further thought. You run the scenario, you stress test the assumption, you read something about long-term financial vulnerability, and then spend 20 minutes doing arithmetic that confirms what you already half knew. The loop doesn't just run, it runs with citations. The system isn't malfunctioning, it is working precisely as designed, inside a context where the design is no longer serving you.
This channel looks at the psychological patterns that quietly shape financial decisions, the ones intelligent people often can't see because they look too much like common sense. This is where the pattern stops being abstract. You hit a savings milestone, one you set for yourself over a year ago, maybe longer, one you told yourself would feel like something when it arrived, and on the day it happens, you register it. A small, genuine moment of satisfaction, and then, almost immediately, your mind begins establishing what the next milestone should be. The current number no longer feels like enough, not because anything changed, but because the goalpost relocated the moment you reached it. You can frame this as ambition. It has the shape of ambition, but notice what didn't happen. You didn't rest, you didn't exhale, you didn't let the moment land.
Or this, you're at dinner, relaxed evening, people you're comfortable with, no crisis present, nothing requiring your attention, and you're calculating, not visibly, not in a way anyone at the table would detect, but you're tracking what was ordered, running a rough total, quietly deciding how to handle the bill in a way that doesn't feel like a leak. The other people at the table are simply having dinner. You are managing a transaction while also having dinner. And somewhere in the back of your mind is the faint awareness that you cannot remember the last time you were somewhere without part of you being somewhere else. Or consider the purchase loop, not for something extravagant, for something ordinary, something the household genuinely needs, something the budget clearly supports. You open multiple tabs, you compare, you close the tabs, you come back 2 days later and do it again. Not because the research is producing better information, because spending feels like a reduction in the container you've been so carefully filling. Even a small, justified outflow triggers the alertness, even when the math is not the issue. Or, and this is perhaps the quietest one, someone suggests something spontaneous, a weekend away, a shared meal somewhere new, a small experience that would genuinely be good for you. Your first internal response is not excitement, it's calculation, then a resistance that presents itself as practicality, then sometimes a flicker of guilt about the resistance, because you know, honestly, that the money isn't what you're actually protecting. That guilt. Sit with it for a moment. It isn't guilt about spending. It's guilt about the fact that the system designed to protect your life has started interfering with it.
Here's what doesn't surface in most conversations about financial responsibility. The cost of this pattern is not financial. It's temporal. It's experiential. It compounds in the same quiet, invisible way that interest compounds, except what's accumulating is not wealth, it's missed presence. Every year spent operating under the assumption that safety is one milestone further away is a year lived in preparation mode. Not consciously, you're not making a formal decision to postpone ease until a specified date. You are simply perpetually getting ready to live more freely once things feel a little more settled. And things never feel quite settled enough, because the settlement was never going to come from the account. Consider the 10-year version, a decade of real income, responsible behavior, genuine discipline. At the end of it, you have meaningfully more than you started with. You are measurably better positioned by every financial metric, and you feel approximately the same level of background unease you felt 10 years earlier. Possibly more, because now there's more to lose, more complexity to the plan, more elaborate scenarios for the vigilance system to generate. What was spent across that decade wasn't money, it was ease, the capacity to be fully somewhere, the ability to make small decisions, a meal, a weekend, a minor purchase, without a low-level calculation running underneath them. These aren't dramatic losses. That's precisely what makes them difficult to account for. No one lists presence on a net worth statement. No one calculates the cost of spending a significant portion of their quiet moments running contingency plans that never came due. And the particular weight of this, the thing that surfaces when people begin to honestly examine it, is retrospective clarity. Looking back at a period when the financial situation was, by any fair accounting, fine, when the threat the vigilance system was tracking was largely hypothetical, and recognizing that the vigilance consumed a share of that time that cannot be returned. Not all of it. Life was still happening. The experiences, the relationships, the small joys present. But there was a membrane between you and full contact with those moments. A thin, persistent layer of monitoring, of readiness, of not quite landing because the system was scanning the perimeter. That membrane doesn't dissolve when the number goes up. It often becomes more sophisticated, because the more there is to protect, the more elaborate threat scenarios become,
the more justified the vigilance feels. This is the actual long-term cost, not poverty, not recklessness, a quiet, compounding narrowing of the distance between you and your own life.
Take these slowly. There is no score. There is no right answer. When your financial situation genuinely improves, a raise, a strong period, a goal met, how long does the relief last before the planning begins again? When you spend money on something that clearly improves your daily life, do you experience an unease you can't fully justify with the math? Can you name a specific number in savings, in total, that you believe would actually make you feel safe, not just more secure, safe? If you're honest, has that number changed over time? Has it consistently remained just slightly ahead of where you are? If someone who knows you well were asked to describe your relationship with money, would the words they use suggest they see the vigilance more clearly than you do? These aren't leading questions. They're not building toward a conclusion. They're just offering a moment of honest observation that the normal pace of life rarely creates space for.
Here is something worth sitting with carefully. The vigilance is not a character flaw. It is not evidence of damage or disorder. It is a system that was once calibrated for a specific environment, possibly one where the alertness was exactly the right response, where tracking threats closely was genuinely useful, where staying ready was the intelligent thing to do. Systems don't update themselves when circumstances change. They continue doing what they were designed to do in the context they were built for, long after that context has shifted. The vigilance isn't broken, it's just running in the wrong weather. What changes this is not discipline, not a better savings rate, not a more refined financial plan or a more thorough spreadsheet. What begins to shift things is observation, the capacity to watch the loop while it's running, to recognize a thought as part of a pattern rather than a direct transmission from reality, to notice the checking impulse arriving without automatically following it, to see the goalposts moving without concluding that you simply need to run faster. This isn't a technique with stages. It's not a practice with a measurable outcome. It's more like finally noticing a sound in your house that has been present for years, when you'd stopped registering because it had become part of the background. Once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. You can now ask what's making it. That's a different position to be in. Not a safe position, necessarily, not immediately. Possibly not in the way the vigilance system has always defined safety, but a different relationship to the question of whether you are okay. Because the answer to that question, at the level of actual circumstances, has been yes for some time now. The facts say you're okay. The balance says you're okay. The vigilance system says something different, and says it more persistently than anything else. Learning to distinguish between those two voices is not a financial skill. It's quieter than that, and more consequential. You started watching this because the title said something true, not theoretically true, specifically true. The kind of recognition that doesn't land in the analytical mind first. It lands somewhere slightly further in, before you've had a chance to evaluate it. Saving money still doesn't make you feel safe. And now there's some language for why. That language won't resolve the pattern tonight. Naming a loop doesn't stop it immediately, but something has shifted slightly because there is now a small amount of distance between you and it, enough to observe it, enough to notice when the thought returns and recognize what it is before you follow it. If something in this felt true in a way that goes beyond the idea, if there was a moment of recognition that felt more personal than intellectual, it may be worth asking yourself where that recognition is actually pointing. That's the only thing worth doing with what you've heard today.